Amira Johnson wasn't dressed like someone who belonged, at least not in the eyes of the men inside Langston Prestige Motors. She stepped through the towering glass doors of Chicago's most elite luxury car dealership wearing her high school uniform, a simple white blouse, navy skirt, and scuffed sneakers. Her curly hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and a faded canvas backpack hung from one arm. She didn't carry a designer purse. She wasn't dripping in diamonds. And most notably, she was a 17-year-old black girl standing alone in a place built to flatter wealth, whiteness, and status. From the moment she crossed the threshold, eyes followed her not with welcome but with suspicion. The polished floors, the Italian leather couches, and the scent of imported cologne seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." Then came the voice. "Excuse me," the manager sneered, strolling toward her with a smirk. "This isn't a showroom for photos or fantasy. Our vehicles aren't for browsers." A few salesmen laughed quietly. Amira said nothing. She simply stared at the crimson Lamborghini Serif SVR in the center of the room. Its lines were bold, powerful, just like her father. He didn't know she was planning to buy it, not yet. But in that moment, her presence, her skin, her uniform, her silence was enough to offend. And without even asking her name, they decided who she was. That was their mistake. Amira didn't cry in the car. She sat in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel of her aging Honda Civic as the Chicago skyline blurred behind her. The shame clung to her like static, silent but suffocating. Her throat burned with unspoken words, but she swallowed them, just as she had in the showroom. They didn't deserve her voice. Not then. The moment she pulled into the long driveway of their family home, modern, understated, elegant. In the way her father liked it, Amira felt her composure begin to crack. The gates opened slowly, and for the first time that day, she didn't feel like she had to hide. Elijah Johnson was seated in his usual armchair by the window, a book in one hand, a cup of black coffee in the other. The moment he saw his daughter's face, the way her shoulders sagged and her steps faltered, he stood without a word. Amira walked straight into his arms, and there, with the weight of injustice pressing against her chest, she let go. "It wasn't just about the car," she whispered between sobs. "It was the way they looked at me, like I didn't matter, like I wasn't real." Elijah held her tighter. He didn't interrupt. He'd lived through that look too many times himself in boardrooms, at airports, in rooms where he was the only black man with power. And still, after building an empire in renewable tech, they sometimes still questioned if he belonged. When her sobs softened, Elijah gently pulled back and looked her in the eyes. "You do matter, Amira. You're more than they could ever understand. But the world will keep trying to convince you otherwise. That's why you have to know who you are." Amira wiped her eyes, her voice steadier now. "I didn't want to back down. I wanted to show them." Elijah smiled, a rare sharpness entering his gaze. "Then we will, but not with anger, not with shouting, with presence. With principle. We'll make them remember who they underestimated." For a brief moment, father and daughter stood in silence, not broken, but resolved. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Inside, a quiet fire began to burn. The lesson had been cruel, but it had also awakened something powerful. They were just getting started. The next morning, the air in downtown Chicago buzzed with its usual rhythm-hurried footsteps, espresso orders, car engines slicing through the early light. But something was different outside Langston Prestige Motors. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom, silent and gleaming like a monolith, glided up to the front entrance. Its V12 engine purred low and controlled, drawing attention from passing pedestrians and luxury shoppers alike. The vehicle rolled to a graceful stop directly in front of the dealership's glass facade. Inside, Cole Harrington was halfway through his morning espresso when he noticed the car through the window. His eyebrows lifted. "Now that," he muttered, "is someone who knows how to make an entrance." By the time the door opened and Elijah Johnson stepped out, George Langston, the dealership owner, had joined Cole at the door, all smiles and outstretched hands. Elijah's suit was perfectly tailored charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, paired with polished Oxfords and a quiet confidence that made the entire showroom pause. "Welcome, sir," Cole said smoothly, already calculating commissions in his head. "Cole Harrington, sales manager. What can we help you with today?" Elijah's eyes scanned the space, the walls of glass, the white marble floor, the lineup of Ferraris and Lamborghinis standing proud. His gaze finally landed on Cole, and for a moment, he simply studied him. Then came the words. I'm here because someone very important to me came through these doors yesterday, Elijah said, voice low but unmistakably sharp. She wasn't treated with respect. She was humiliated. Cole blinked. I'm sorry to hear that. May I ask who? She's my daughter, Elijah said. Her name is Amira Johnson. And you, Mr. Harrington, are the man who decided she didn't belong here. The words hit harder than a shout. The hum of quiet music and polite chatter in the showroom fell silent, replaced by a hush that stretched thin over every inch of the room. Cole's smile faltered. His throat tightened. George stepped forward, his own expression sliding from charm to concern. Elijah took a step closer. I didn't come here for apologies, he said. I came here to make sure you understand exactly what happens when you judge a person by their appearance and forget their worth. And with that, the tide began to turn. Cole Harrington stood frozen, the weight of Elijah Johnson's words pressing into his chest like iron. The man he had written off the day before unseen, unnamed, now stood before him not only as a powerful customer, but as a father with fire in his voice and truth in his eyes. George Langston cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to recover the moment. Mr. Johnson, please, I'm certain this is a misunderstanding. If we could speak privately. No, Elijah replied firmly. This conversation is not private. The humiliation wasn't. Neither will be the reckoning. Heads turned across the showroom. Conversations stopped. A few customers began edging closer, their interest piqued by the tension hanging thick in the air. Cole could feel the stares crawling across his skin. His polished mask had begun to crack. She came here to buy a gift, Elijah said, his voice calm but cutting. Not to beg, not to pretend. She stood where you're standing now and asked about a car, and all of you laughed. Cole opened his mouth to deny it, to paint over the truth with polished words and plausible denials. But before he could speak, another voice interrupted him. I was there. All eyes turned to the corner of the showroom. Daniel Reyes, the youngest member of the sales team, stepped forward, his face pale but determined. I heard it all. I watched it happen, Daniel said, eyes locked on Elijah. Your daughter was polite, curious. She never raised her voice. And she was dismissed, ridiculed because of what she wore and because of who she is. Cole turned sharply toward Daniel, his voice sharp and low. Daniel, I think you've said enough. No, sir, Daniel said, stronger now. I haven't said nearly enough. For a heartbeat, the room stood still. Then Elijah nodded slowly, as if acknowledging something much deeper than agreement. Thank you, he said to Daniel. Courage matters. Turning back to Cole and George, Elijah's expression hardened. You have two options, he said. You can issue a press statement that means nothing, or you can come with me, spend 2 weeks inside my world, at the New Dawn Youth Center, where we serve the very people you think don't belong here. Cole stiffened. George looked as though someone had punched the air from his lungs, but Elijah had already turned to leave, his voice lingering like thunder. Sometimes, the only way to unlearn arrogance is to stand in the place where humility lives. The following Monday, Cole Harrington stood stiffly at the entrance of the New Dawn Youth Center, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding his scowl. The building was modest, nothing like the glossy glass facades and Italian marble floors he was used to. The painted walls were peeling in places. The air smelled faintly of crayons and cafeteria food. Cole felt like he had been dropped on another planet. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath. 2 weeks of babysitting because of one overdramatic girl. Beside him, George Langston remained uncharacteristically quiet. The confrontation with Elijah Johnson still played in his mind on loop. The headlines hadn't broken yet, but the pressure was mounting. Damage control no longer meant slick statements. It meant facing the mess they'd created. They were greeted at the front door by Linda Carter, the center's director, whose warm smile barely concealed a quiet authority. Welcome, gentlemen, she said, shaking their hands. We appreciate your presence here. I understand this is new for you, but I hope in time it will also be necessary. Cole raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Inside, children played, read, and worked on art projects. The room buzzed with youthful energy, but Cole remained still, as if afraid to touch anything. His $800 shoes squeaked awkwardly on the worn linoleum floor. Why don't you start by helping with afternoon reading circle? Linda suggested. I'm not a camp counselor, Cole snapped. Before she could respond, a voice behind him interrupted. Hey, mister, you look grumpy. Cole turned. A small black boy no older than 8 stood looking up at him with wide, curious eyes and a grin far too big for his face. He wore a shirt 2 sizes too big and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. Slung over one shoulder was a fraying backpack held together with duct tape and determination. "My name's Miles," the boy said. "What's yours?" Cole blinked, caught off guard. Cole?" "Cool," Miles said. "You're here to help us, right?" "I guess so," Cole mumbled. Miles beamed. "Then come sit with me. I'll show you the best spot near the fan." And before Cole could argue, the boy had grabbed his hand. For the first time in years, Cole didn't pull away. He followed. By the end of the first week, Cole Harrington no longer stood with his arms crossed. He sat stiffly, at first on a plastic chair beside a folding table covered in coloring books, broken crayons, and a chipped box of dominoes. His designer shirt sleeves were rolled up. His phone sat untouched in his jacket pocket, buzzing occasionally, but ignored. Across from him, Miles was hunched over a torn library book, sounding out words with quiet determination. The other children were laughing, playing, teasing each other across the room, but Miles stayed focused, his tiny finger tracing every line like it mattered more than anything in the world. Cole studied him. There was something different about this boy, something weightless and yet impossibly grounded. His joy wasn't performative. It was chosen deliberate, even in the face of obvious lack. "Why don't you ask for a new backpack?" Cole asked one afternoon, eyeing the familiar roll of duct tape hanging off the side of Miles's old bag. Miles glanced at it, then smiled. "Because my mom gave me this one before she got really sick. Every time I carry it, I feel like she's walking with me." Cole said nothing. For a long moment, he couldn't. There were no clever comebacks, no eye rolls, just a lump forming in his throat he couldn't quite swallow. No one in his world had ever attached emotion to a backpack. In Cole's life, things were disposable, upgraded, replaced. But to this boy, this child with barely enough, it was sacred. That night, Cole didn't go straight home. He sat in his car outside the center, staring through the windshield into the dim orange glow of the streetlight. He thought of Miles, of the way the boy looked at the world not with bitterness, but with grace. Thought of Amira Johnson, standing in his dealership, eyes proud even as he mocked her. For the first time, Cole asked himself a question he had never dared entertain. What if the problem is me? The thought settled into his chest like a weight, but unlike shame, it didn't sink him. It grounded him. And deep inside, something cracked. Not from weakness, but from the pressure of truth finally breaking through. That night, Cole sat at the edge of his bed, phone in hand, screen glowing in the darkness. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. He had typed, deleted, and retyped the same message at least 10 times. Finally, he stopped trying to find perfect words and just told the truth. "Amira, I know it might be too late, but I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong. I judged you without knowing anything about you, and I deeply regret that. I've been spending time at New Dawn, and it's changed me. I hope one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me." He stared at the message for a long moment, then hit send. The following morning, Langston Prestige Motors hummed with its usual luxury. Espresso machines whirring, leather shoes tapping on polished floors, engines purring behind glass. But for Cole Harrington, something had shifted. The showroom no longer felt like his kingdom. It felt hollow. He was reviewing inventory when George Langston approached him, looking unusually pale. "Elijah Johnson is back," George said, voice low, "and he's ready to finalize the Lamborghini purchase." Cole straightened up, his pulse quickening. "He wants to see me?" George shook his head slowly. "No, he asked for Daniel Reyes to handle the transaction. Only Daniel." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Cole forced a nod, but his chest felt tight. It wasn't about the commission. It was about something far more costly, trust, and he had lost it. Back at the New Dawn Youth Center later that day, Cole sat beside Miles again, but his smile was smaller, more thoughtful. Miles noticed. "You okay?" the boy asked. "I messed up," Cole admitted. "Hurt someone who didn't deserve it. And now, I'm trying to make it right." Miles leaned in, voice soft. "Did you say sorry?" "I did." "Then that's a start," Miles said simply. "But you gotta show it too. My mom used to say words are just the seeds. What matters is how you water them." Cole stared at the boy in awe, so young, so wise. And in that moment, Something within him fully settled. This was only the beginning. He hadn't earned forgiveness yet, but for the first time, he truly wanted to. The grand hall of the Astoria Hotel shimmered with soft golden light and the quiet hum of classical music. Chandeliers sparkled like constellations overhead, and guests dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns moved gracefully beneath them, glasses of champagne in hand. It was the annual fundraising gala for the New Dawn Youth Center, hosted by none other than Amira Johnson. Cole Harrington stood near the entrance, adjusting the cuffs of his black tuxedo. He'd been to hundreds of events like this before, but tonight, something felt different. He wasn't here to impress, to close a deal, or to network. He was here to face something much harder. He spotted Amira Johnson the moment she entered the room. She wore a simple, pale blue gown that flowed like silk water. No diamonds, no gold, just grace. Her posture was poised, her presence unmistakable. People turned to look, but she didn't seek their attention. Cole watched her for a long moment before gathering the courage to approach. "Amira," he said gently, stopping just a few feet away. "May I speak with you?" She turned slowly. Her eyes met his with calm strength, not cold, but not inviting either. "Go ahead." Cole took a breath. "I'm not here to make excuses. What I said to you, how I treated you, it was wrong, all of it. I judged you by what you wore, how you looked, and I'm ashamed of that. I've been volunteering at New Dawn. It's been humbling, painful, and necessary. I'm still learning, but I promise you, I'm not the man I was in that showroom." Amira studied him in silence. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice clear, composed. "I can see that you mean what you say, Mr. Harrington, and I do forgive you. But understand this, forgiveness isn't the end, it's the beginning." Cole nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know." Amira stepped closer, her gaze softening. "The real question is what you'll do with this second chance. Will it change how you treat everyone, not just me, not just here, but when no one is watching?" He met her eyes, this time without flinching. "Yes," he said. "It already has." Amira offered the smallest smile, genuine, quiet, but full of meaning. "Then make sure it never stops." As she walked away to join her father, Cole stood still, lighter somehow, but deeply aware that the road ahead wasn't about redemption through words. It was about proving it every single day. As the final course was cleared and the music softened, Amira Johnson stepped onto the small stage at the center of the ballroom. Conversations quieted instantly. Every guest politician, philanthropist, CEO turned their eyes toward him with respect. Dressed in a classic black tuxedo, Elijah held the microphone with a calmness that commanded the room. But there was a quiet steel beneath his measured voice. "Tonight," he began, "we gather not just to raise funds for New Dawn, but to remind ourselves what this work really means. It's not about charity, it's about dignity." In the front row, George Langston sat stiffly, trying to appear composed. Cole Harrington, seated 2 chairs down, held his breath. He knew what was coming, and he knew he couldn't stop it. Elijah's gaze swept across the room. "Recently, I made a decision to purchase a very special car, a gift for someone I love more than words can say. In the process, I visited a dealership. What happened there reminded me that no matter how far we think we've come as a society, prejudice still lives in polished spaces." A hush fell deeper over the crowd. "I was considering Langston Prestige Motors as a partner for a larger project, the replacement of my company's entire executive fleet. An opportunity worth over $50 million. Gasps rippled through the room. Even George's breath caught. Elijah paused, letting the silence hang. "But I've decided tonight that only a small fraction of that contract will go to Langston Motors. The rest will be distributed to dealerships that demonstrate one thing above all else: respect for every person, regardless of how they look when they walk through the door." The weight of those words landed hard. "This isn't punishment," Elijah said, eyes now on George and Cole. "This is accountability, because the cost of disrespect isn't just financial, it's the loss of trust. And trust," he added, "isn't something you buy, it's something you earn or lose." A beat of silence. Then the room erupted in thunderous applause, not for the money, but for the message. Cole lowered his eyes, shame and resolve flooding him at once. George sat motionless, the realization of what they had thrown away settling like stone in his chest. And Elijah? He stepped down from the stage, not as a man seeking revenge, but as one demanding a better world. Weeks passed. The glow of the gala faded into headlines, and whispers of Elijah Johnson's bold public message spread across business circles. But for Cole Harrington, the real story wasn't what people were saying, it was what he was finally starting to feel. Back at Langston Prestige Motors, things were no longer the same. Under Elijah's suggestion, the dealership launched its first-ever inclusion and dignity training program, with Cole leading every session. At first, some employees rolled their eyes. But as Cole stood before them, the same man who once judged people by their shoes and skin, they began to listen. Because he was different now. Cole no longer used a title to demand respect. He earned it through humility. He spoke openly about his failures, about how one moment of arrogance nearly cost him everything that mattered. He told them about Miles, the little boy who taught him the meaning of loyalty and love with nothing more than a worn backpack and an unbreakable spirit. And he spoke of Amira Johnson, whose silent strength and unwavering dignity forced him to look in the mirror. Outside of work, Cole continued volunteering at New Dawn Youth Center every weekend. He and Miles became inseparable. They played basketball, painted murals, and read books, sometimes the same one, over and over, just because Miles liked the ending. One evening, Cole brought a new backpack to the center. It was strong, stylish, with Miles's favorite superhero stitched into the side. Miles opened it, smiled, then reached for his old one, torn, taped, and full of history. "I'll use both," he said. "One for school, one for memories." Cole nodded, heart full. Later that week, Cole was locking up the showroom when a familiar voice greeted him. It was Elijah Johnson. "I heard things are changing," Elijah said, eyes calm. "I came to see for myself." Cole looked him in the eye, no longer afraid. "I still have a lot to learn, but I'm walking the right road now." Elijah nodded. "Keep walking." As Elijah turned to leave, Cole stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker across the glass. For the first time in his life, he didn't see his reflection. He saw through it, and beneath the surface, he found who he truly wanted to be. In a world that often judges quickly and harshly, this story reminds us of something timeless. A person's worth can never be measured by appearance, status, or wealth, but by how they treat others, especially the unseen and unheard. Whether young or old, rich or poor, we all carry the power to uplift or to wound with just a glance, a word, a gesture. For older generations who have witnessed the tides of change over decades, this story affirms a quiet truth we've always known, that character reveals itself most clearly in how we act when no one is watching. It also teaches us that it's never too late to unlearn pride, to say "I was wrong," and to walk the humble road of growth. True transformation begins with listening, not to reply, but to understand. As we age, our legacy isn't built on titles or possessions, but on the lives we've touched with kindness, the dignity we've defended, and the compassion we've shown to those the world might ignore. This story is not just about redemption, it's an invitation to reflect, forgive, and lead by quiet example. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.